Hi guys, just wanted to give you a budget build guide for ESIEMO. So I'm going to give you one build for farming, and then I will give you a build for bossing, but just to be completely upfront, budget ESIEMO isn't great at bossing. You're mostly going to be relying on your guns, but I will sort of explain that when I go over to that build. So for his sort of standard content, you know, farming, dungeons, that sort of thing, here's the build, and this needs no catalysts and no activators. So the idea of the build really is you're mostly going to ignore his fourth ability. It's quite clunky to use. It doesn't really lean into farming that much, so you're going to be pretty much cycling between his second and third ability, and then you'll proc that with your second ability, and you'll sort of do that and repeat. And with this build you're actually able to keep up your MP, and I will sort of discuss the external components in a moment, because there are a couple of things you're going to want to look out for on your external components to help with that. So for the sub module, as with pretty much every budget build, just go with whatever sub module you currently have built up. Just make sure it's max leveled so you get the most module capacity. In this case I've got mid-air maneuvering. I just like the sort of flexibility of that mod, but if you want something cheaper you could just use one of the blue sub modules. So since this is more of a farming build, you don't need an insane amount of tankiness, but you will want some, so you'll want HP amplification. Now you can use increased HP instead of HP amplification if you like, but the reason why I actually prefer HP amplification on this build, aside from it giving you a little bit more HP, is it actually reduces your max shield a little bit, which leans quite nicely into ESIEMO's passive. So when his shield is broken, he drops a bomb on the ground, so that's just going to help you farm a little bit more. And you can see with the build it only has a 9.5 second cooldown, and so by having a slightly less shield it's going to break a bit easier, and so lean into this passive a little bit more. Not a massive difference, so if you don't have HP amplification built up but you do have increased HP, feel free to just swap to that. So next is MP collector. You probably know by now, but really if you're spamming out abilities you need MP, and MP collector is just fantastic for that. When you're farming you're going to be killing a ton of enemies, and so it's going to keep rocking and keep your MP topped up so that you can continue to spam your abilities. And the next is the sort of cooldown related mods, because again you're spamming your abilities so you want them up as much as possible. And you can see with this build you get his first ability on a 3.8 second cooldown and it has 5 stacks, so you just always have this up. His second ability is only on 3.2 second cooldown, and his third ability is on a 4.5 second cooldown with 3 stacks. So his abilities are always up with this build. So you're going to have MP conversion, just a massive amount of cooldown, nimble fingers, again massive amount of cooldown, and then you're going to have a unleveled focus on fire. So the reason why you want focus on fire is impart the extra cooldown, and the difference between a max leveled focus on fire versus an unleveled focus on fire is nothing when it comes to cooldown. It stays at that 6.1%. And also focus on fire uses this catalyst, which is pre-installed on ESIEMO, so you're sort of making the most of the pre-installed slots. And then also it has fire skill power. So with ESIEMO's abilities, his base skill power is quite high, and so you want to be looking at flat skill power rather than skill power modifier, and focus on fire uses just flat skill power. And of course all of ESIEMO's abilities are fire damage, so that's why you use focus on fire. And then last, you're going to want to use maximize range, and it's going to be on level 1 so that you can slot it in with the remaining module capacity. So part of the reason for that is it uses the pre-installed catalyst slot. The unleveled maximized range gives you twice as much range increase as your say unleveled skill expansion. So you can see here skill expansion is just 12%, whereas maximized range is 24%. And again, you don't need to worry about skill power modifier because it has such a small effect when it comes to ESIEMO's abilities. So in terms of the reactor, you're going to want a fire and tech reactor, so that is a burning mechanics reactor. Now you do have quite a few options when it comes to the sort of secondary stats, so I would suggest going either fire and tech as one of them, and then I would say go for either cooldown, range, or skill cost. Any of those combinations are going to work really. It gives you quite a nice bit of flexibility. So in terms of external components, as with pretty much all budget builds, I don't like to sort of suggest a best in slot or a sort of a set for you to go and farm because it defeats the purpose. So I would just go with a general tanky set. So you're going to want things like max HP, defense, and resistances. The only slight difference is I would suggest going for some MP related buffs, since you are going to be spamming his abilities so much. So things like the auxiliary power, you can get something like MP recovery out of combat. The sensor, you can get MP recovery in combat. The memory, you can get MP recovery modifier, and then you can also get max MP on your sensor as well. So just keep an eye on those sort of things, and sort of try and mix them with some tankiness. And then in terms of guns, again, don't like to suggest a sort of best in slot weapon because it defeats the purpose of a budget build. So I would say in first instance just use whatever gun you've got built up. Realistically you can never go wrong with something like a Thunder Cage. It's a gun that you get really early and you don't even need too much investment for it to be a really good farming weapon. But again, just use whatever gun that you've got built up. If you are looking for a gun that's sort of really fun with ESIEMO, then you can't go wrong with the Secret Garden. It sort of synergizes really well because when you're sort of spamming your tech abilities, you get pest control, and pest control gives you increased damage with your gun and increased skill power. So it's sort of a really fun sort of synergy with that. So in terms of a budget bossing build for ESIEMO, again, it's not really the best, to be honest. You are just heavily relying on your guns. Now, ESIEMO does have his fourth ability, which can be used to increase his firearm attack, but with a budget build, you can't really get this up 100% of the time, and so it doesn't really work out too well. Or at least you can't get it up 100% of the time without sacrificing basically all of your tankiness. And so when it comes to the mods, you're just going to do your sub module, of course. You're going to want sort of 2 HP mods for your tankiness, and then you're going to do the rest in sort of cooldown in MP conversion, an unleveled focus on fire, again for a little bit more cooldown, and then maximize duration. This is so you get as much skill duration, and so that way you are getting your fourth ability up as much as possible. You have it up for 14 seconds every 46 seconds. So yeah, you can sort of see you're mostly just relying on your gun really, and so I really wouldn't suggest using a budget ESIEMO build for bossing unless you have a fairly built up gun that is good for bossing. So something like the Enduring Legacy, even something like the Secret Garden, as I mentioned, you know, those sort of weapons, Greg's Fate, because at that point you may as well just use any Descendant. Sort of ESIEMO isn't giving you anything special by using him, unfortunately. It just does need a little bit more investment to make him viable when it comes to bossing. And so yeah, I hope that helps. Thanks.